Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello and welcome back to the show. Last episode, we had a look at the science behind the DASH diet, which is a dietary approach to preventing hypertension. But did you know that apart from diet, stress can actually be a huge contributor to hypertension and a host of other stress-related diseases as well? Yet it is often seen as a temporary inconvenience when in reality, it's probably one of the most guilty culprits behind a shortened lifespan. So, in this episode, we are examining what the repercussions of chronic stress are, what typically contributes to stress, how to manage our stress in the long term, and so much more. And to guide us through this is health coach Vicky Midwood, who specializes in dysfunctional eating and drinking patterns. So, hi, Vicky. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Marie. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, likewise. So, for starters, what are some examples of stress related disorders or diseases, and how does it come into play with what you do?
Great questions. Well, there's so many. I'm not going to list them all, but you mentioned one there that's important, hypertension. Absolutely. Type 2 diabetes is very much linked to stress and how we handle it. Autoimmune issues, PCOS, Alzheimer's, memory problems. There's a whole host of things that go along with stress. And we don't necessarily connect those issues and diseases with stress at all.
Yeah, for sure. And how would you describe a stress related disorder's effect on one's lifespan?
For the majority of people, it absolutely shortens it. And it makes them so much more susceptible to illness and disease because it has a huge negative effect on your immune system.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases as well, the stress is what contributes to having a disorder. And once you are diagnosed with that, it is really hard to kind of rewind to back to before it started. I don't know if I'm wording this correctly at all because I'm trying so hard to encompass all of the disorders or diseases, and it's really difficult because there's just so many, like you said.
I think it would be easier to say there is nothing that isn't impacted by stress because just about everything is. If we trace it right back to root cause, we will see that stress is massive. And I'm going to hopefully help people to understand just what stress is because it's not necessarily what we think it is.
Yeah, that alone is giving me a lot of stress. Huh? How ironic is that? I also saw recently The Economist. There was an article that was published about how it's n- it it's not enough to say just relax because more often than not, people who do get really stressed or suffer from some kind of chronic stress can't just relax. But I think what we've spoken about, right, right now, is a great preface for our topic for today. So before we get any further into detail, let's break the ice and get to know you a bit better, if that's all right.
Sure. Let's do that.
Okay, so this is Have You Met Vicky? And my first question for you is, what do you do in your spare time?
I love going to the cinema and I enjoy going to the gym and just being with friends and having a coffee and a laugh and a chat.
That's the best way to enjoy life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in terms of cinema, are you a huge fan of movies and films at all, or do you just enjoy the experience?
A little bit of both. So the last film I went to see was the Beetlejuice, the second one, because I remember the first one when it came out. But we went to the 4D experience, which is in the IMAX, where your chairs move and you get water sprayed at you, and it's just so it's both. It's both the film and the experience.
Right. So do you enjoy the 4D experience?
Absolutely, it's hilarious. You can't stop
Really?
laughing. Yeah.
Wow. I get so stressed from 4D experiences because it's like I'm just anticipating like, oh, what's going to slap me in the face next? You know, I went
I
to a
just
4
laugh.
yeah. I went to a 4D experience once. It was some Shrek show in
Right.
Universal Studios.
Amazing.
And that was really stressful for me. But it's great that you get a laugh out of it. It's interesting.
But what you've just said there is super important about this topic because it's how we respond.
Mm.
So you're anticipating something which potentially you're not ready for, whereas I'm excited by the fact that I'm not ready for it. But biologically and chemically, what's going on in the body is exactly the same. It's how we interpret it.
Oh, that's really interesting. But you seem to get excited and get the laughs about lots of things.
Yeah.
So that's
I've
great.
learned to. I've learned to
Yeah.
manage my
Yeah.
stress. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what I was going to ask next. Is it, like if that was a learned trait or if you always had that?
Very much learned because I actually did have a heart attack when I was 49, so back in 2018,
Mhm.
and that was so linked to stress. It was also linked to my past history of my own disordered eating and issues. But that was a big wake up call for me to start really looking at how was I handling stress. And so it was a conscious choice to do it differently. So it's definitely learned.
That's amazing. So how long roughly did you take to fully adopt this mindset?
Not long, because I've had a lot of practice, obviously getting over my own other issues. The process of changing things for me is one where, number one, I get super curious and I need to find out all of the science behind it and then how it works and then just start doing it and experiment. And if we look at things, I love to help people to look at change as an experiment because it takes the pressure off. And we can just try things then. And if it doesn't work, it's like, okay, that didn't work, move on to the next one. So it didn't take long at all. And this is, again, a bit of a myth about habit change that it takes ages. You can do it really fast. It just depends on how much effort you put in.
Right. And I think there's also this bit of motivation there as well. I do notice with certain people who have experienced life-changing events such as suffering from a heart attack or my mom recently suffered from a stroke that they get this motivation. I'm not sure if that's the right wording at all, but there is some sort of personality change or like a motivation shift there, priority change. So what is your experience with that?
I think you're absolutely right for some people and not for everyone. But if it is, I called it a wake up call because I think it's an opportunity for you to get honest and to take a little look back at what have I been doing? How have I been living? Has it been serving me? And do I want things to be different? Because kind of now is my opportunity because I don't want the thing that's just happened to happen again. So it's a massive motivator, and motivation is a really good word for it. But other people can look at it differently and see it as an opportunity to just go, well, that's it, then what's the point? And to do
Yeah.
nothing and to just give up. And that's an interesting factor to look at because personalities definitely do come into it as to how we handle stress.
Yeah. So circling back to cinema, what is one do you have a favorite movie? I know it's hard to pick, but you have one.
Oh, wow. So I think, yeah, it's going to sound really, really strange because it's not necessarily related to the cinema. But my favorite movie, I think, of all time, and I know it sounds really quite sad, but it's just so much joy and it brings back so many memories, is the very first ABBA movie that they did. Just because I love the music and the songs and the memories that it brings back to me. So I think I've probably seen it over 15 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a movie 15 times.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's a pretty reasonable, modest amount for movie lovers, because I like my partner is a movie lover as well, and he's watched Interstellar like more than 50 times, I think.
All right, and hands up, there is a movie I've watched more than that, but it's kind of a bit of a cult one, which is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I've definitely seen that way more than 15 times.
So you mentioned that part of your love for cinema is also the experience.
Yeah.
Is there an experience at the cinema that you particularly enjoy? Not specifically the movie, but the experience of being in the cinema itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the very fact that you are in a space where environment is massive. And especially when it comes to stress, environment is huge. And the whole lighting, and you kind of know that the ambience of the room is going to change once the adverts are over and the film's going to start and the lights go down and you're sitting there ready for it. And it's a massive screen, isn't it? And depending on the size of the screen, but the resonance of the audio when the deep bass comes in and it kind of like feels that you and the room are shaking. It's just something that you can't replicate anywhere else.
Yeah. So has there been a cinema going experience that has been particularly memorable for you?
Now that's an interesting one. Yeah, and I'll say, but it's nothing to do with the reasons that I said just then. I think a really memorable one was when I went with my cousins. So I think there was probably about 8 of us who all went to the cinema together. And I can't even tell you what we saw, but it was the experience of going with a whole group of family members. I'd never done it before. And so it sticks in my mind that it was just such fun, us all being in the queue and in the foyer and waiting for the tickets and who was going to sit next to who. So yeah, it sticks in my head.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's adorable. Well, I feel like we got to know you a bit better. It's such a delight. I wish we could continue this, but unfortunately, it's time to get into the interview and talk about stress-related diseases, which is a fun topic, but necessary for sure. So for starters, how would you define longevity?
So for me, and there's so many definitions, but the definition that I utilize for myself and for my clients is living longer, healthier, disease-free. That's it.
Nice. Apt, short,
Yeah.
sweet. Yeah, no confusion there.
That is how I tend to be. I'm a great science geek, but I love to just make it clear and simple and precise so that there's no confusion and people just get it. Because I think with a lot of health stuff, we just overcomplicate it way too much. And that's part of the reason why people don't take action, because they're just like, I really don't know what to do. I've got so much information. And so I'm very much somebody who just, fewer words, the better. The clearer you can be, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And as for stress, most of us react with varying degrees of stress. I think a clear example was you laughing at the movies while I would be stressed by the 4D experience. So, how would you define chronic stress?
Great question again. So I think the easiest thing to first of all do is kind of look at what are the 3 sort of main stressors, chronic stress being one of them. We all need stress. We're talking about stress as if it's a bad thing. It isn't, right? We need stress. It's called Eurostress. That's EUR, Eurostress, right? That's the stuff that motivates you to get up and show up to do this podcast. It's the stress that we have when we've got deadlines to reach. It's the stress that we have that makes sure we don't miss our flight, right? We need these kinds of stresses in our lives just to help us to function. But then we have acute stress. And that's also vital. This is the stress that happens if you step out in traffic and suddenly there's a bus coming that might hit you. You don't even think about it. You will respond and react. And that acute stress response that happens is absolutely vital to our survival. So again, we need that. It's not a bad thing, but it should literally last a few seconds. Now, chronic stress, if you like, is that acute stress that lasts for a much, much longer time. And it's that chronic stress that does significant damage to our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And it's the stuff that we're not even aware is going on. And that's the problem, because it's what I call the hidden stressors that we don't know are happening within our body because we can't feel it, we can't see it, we can't taste it, we can't touch it, but it's happening.
Right. And so, what you were describing earlier on, with chronic stress being somewhat like acute stress, but lasting far, far longer, it sounds a bit like rumination. Is that linked at all?
Rumination and procrastination, massive causes of stress. And to help people to understand just what do we even mean by stress, as I say, it is a bit like electricity. You can't taste it, feel it, touch it, see it. But we know it's there because it will come out in various ways. In some people, really obvious. They may have gut problems. They might alternate between constipation and diarrhea. Other people may have suddenly skin flare-ups, or they might suddenly find they've got a migraine or a backache, and they're not going to connect that necessarily with stress. But one of the key causes of chronic stress are the thoughts that we think in our own head about stuff that hasn't even happened yet and probably never will. And that is the stuff in our heads that is creating, the thoughts themselves create chemical and biological and neurotransmitter responses in our system that we don't know is happening. So when you're talking to yourself in your head, and we all do it, we call it thinking, other people call it their inner voice, whatever you call it, we all have it. And that, for the majority of people, is the biggest cause of chronic stress in their lives. Yeah.
This is wonderful. I think I'm finding out right now in real time while recording this that I probably have chronic stress.
The majority of people in today's world do, because one of the reasons for that, and there's multiple, and by the way, more people are susceptible to it than others, and it very much depends on the family background, the stories and the language that they've heard going on around them. So, for example, if you come from a family where we're always talking about what could go wrong and what could happen, and if you're discussing, what you're watching on the TV, and you start playing that scenario out with it's basically make-believe and fantasy, because it's just not happening and it might not happen. But we're talking about it if it potentially could and have a detrimental effect on our lives. All of a sudden now you're learning to think that way. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes your default. So how we're taught to think as kids, we don't think of it as being taught. We just see it, we hear it, we watch it. And kids copy what adults do, full stop, right? Whether adults like it or not. That's why, if you're a parent, hey ho, right? You're going to damage your kids in some way, but we all do. But for all of us, if we don't know just what things are helpful to us and what things are not helpful to us, we don't really know what stuff we need to be focusing on. Hence rumination, hence procrastination, because we're overthinking. And if you think about when you ruminate, what are you actually doing? You're going over something that's already happened. So you can't change it. The outcome's not going to be any different, but you thinking about it. And this is the kind of the amazing thing and the frustrating thing about the brain is whether it's happening in real time or whether you're revisiting it and replaying it in your own head, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's happening in your head and what's happening now. The thoughts are the same. The feelings are the same. Therefore, the emotional, biological response is the same. So you're ruminating on something that's past and has happened, but as you're thinking about it, you're creating that stress response all over again.
Wow, interesting. So, could you elaborate a little bit more about how chronic stress may have an impact on our lifespan?
Well, if you think about the actions and the behaviors that we can take when we're under stress, for a lot of us, rumination, procrastination, distraction is where we turn to because the brain and the body are going, I'm getting overloaded with all this stuff. Can you just go do something else that actually is going to help me to feel better, to calm down, to stop thinking about that stuff? And what is the easiest thing for us to do? Well, we could do this, pick up the phone and start scrolling, right? That will do it. But that then creates a different response in the body. We could turn to food, and there's certain foods that are going to give us a hit of serotonin and dopamine and GABA that are going to help us to feel better and calm and more relaxed. And they work, so we keep doing it. Or we could turn to something like alcohol or drugs, where it actually helps us to quieten the voices completely and switch off. And all of these things over time, when we keep repeating them, are going to have an effect on our metabolic function, our cellular health. We potentially have leaky gut, which can then lead to autoimmune issues. And we have insulin sensitivity because the more we turn to processed, high fat, high sugary foods, which work, they give us a dopamine hit, they help us to calm down, but they are going to affect what's going on with our hormones. So for women, horrible PMS symptoms, PCOS is increasing massively because of the processed foods that we keep turning to when we're under stress. Alcohol affects your gut function, it affects your brain function. And so what we're doing is we're basically helping to increase apoptosis, which is cellular death. We're decreasing the quality of the mitochondria in the cells and the quality and number of the cells themselves, which means that we're not going to live as long. Or if we do, we're going to be more ill and need more help, that we really haven't got a great quality of life. And that's kind of where we're at. We're living longer, but we're living sicker and fatter than we've ever been before.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, does chronic stress itself have an effect on our longevity, or is it the unhealthy habits that we develop to cope with this chronic stress that have the effect on our longevity?
Brilliant question. Both. Yeah, it does both. Because when we are stressed, as I said, you can't feel it, you can't see it. So if you're sat in traffic and you're getting frustrated because, you've watched the lights change 3 times and nothing's moving and you're going to be late for your meeting, that's just a thought in your head, you think, yes? But you can feel yourself gripping the steering wheel maybe a little bit tighter. And then maybe your head then goes to what's going to happen if you're late? How's that going to play out? And suddenly you've got this whole scenario in the future going on. So this stress response is happening, and that is going to affect your blood glucose levels. It's going to affect your progesterone, your estrogen, your testosterone. And by the way, testosterone levels in men are dropping significantly year on year. Fertility issues in women are increasing year on year because of this chronic stress. So is that a habit that's to do with us eating or drinking the wrong things? No, it's going to happen anyway. So that's why I'm saying it's both, and it's usually a combination. I think this is one of the things, and this is the stuff that I really vent about because it really hacks me off. We've been brought up in a world where it's either or. Is it that or that? And I just want to keep shouting from the rooftops, and it's all of it, right? Stop separating it, because it's everything together. And it's not even just 2 things, it's multiple things. And that's why we have to look at root cause and know that it's our lifestyle, it's our thought process, it's the environment we're in, it's how we're breathing, how we're sitting. If I'm sitting like this on my phone with my head down, I'm creating a stress response in my body because it can't open up and access enough oxygen. So I'm going to be breathing at my chest instead of right down deep from my diaphragm. So physiological stress is having an effect. And so we can't just say it's behavior and it's what's happening in your head. No, it's how you're sitting. Are you moving? Who are you talking to? Right? Because if you're in an environment with people, and we've all been there, where there's certain people in the room, the energy kind of dips, and that affects how we feel about ourselves. Maybe we suddenly start not feeling quite so confident when there's certain people around us. So does that affect our stress? Absolutely. And so all of these things contribute to how we function and therefore longevity.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make there. And when it comes to this functional eating and drinking, like we discussed a little bit about before, we currently have terms like emotional eating to describe more acute, abnormal eating behavior. And most of us know it's not in our best interest or health to indulge in such behaviors, yet we do, and we keep doing so. I think the most important part here is that most emotional eaters keep on doing it. It's a vicious circle. So why does this happen so much?
A brilliant question. And I think it's easy to almost use both emotional eating and stress eating as kind of meaning the same thing. Because when we are feeling that we need a distraction, because it's all getting a little bit too much, or we want to just numb out, or we just want something to soothe us and help us to feel calm, we're going to turn to certain foods. And there's many reasons for that. The main one being it's your brain, a particular part of your brain called the amygdala, which is the survival part of your brain. And when we are under chronic stress, we go into survival mode. Yeah. When we're in survival mode, any high fat, high sugar, high calorie foods are going to be the things that we turn to, because the brain knows that if we're to survive, we have to have enough energy. We have to have enough fuel on board. Okay. So it's very much a brain function for survival. And it's not under your conscious control. So you said a very important thing then when you asked the question. You said, we all know that it's not helpful, but we still do it. When you're in that survival mode, there's nothing to do with the frontal lobe, which is our conscious part of our brain making a decision, right? It is driven by automatic actions, survival. Go back to the acute stress. If you're going to get run over by a bus, you don't stand there and go, oh, I think I'll move now. It's not conscious. You just do it. It's the same with stress eating and emotional eating, which is why oftentimes people will say, I don't know how it happened. I just found that, I kind of went into almost like a trance and I'd already eaten the food. It's the stress response. And we always go to high fat, high sugar, high salt, high calorie foods. Very rarely do we emotionally eat on raw carrot sticks. Right?
Yeah.
or cooked chicken breast, right? It tends to be sweets. It tends to be cakes or biscuits or bread or toast or pasta. And those are the things that are high fat, high calorie, high sugar, high salt. They give us a dopamine and neurotransmitter hit. They also are going to help us to survive, but they also help us to feel in the short term more energized and more able to cope with what's going on before we then often have a crash where we just feel really lethargic and not able to cope. So it's also, so the first thing to know is it's your brain that's telling you to do this. It's nothing to do with willpower and it's not logical. We know that. It's also driven by the bacteria in our gut. So biology is always going to be more powerful. Biology and bacteria are much more powerful than your brain and your logic is ever going to be. So if your microbes in your gut are out of balance and out of kilter because you're often feeding them more highly processed, more high fat, more high sugar foods, then the gut bacteria that like those foods, there's going to be more of them in your body. So they're going to be shouting the loudest to be fed. And so the more we feed those guys, the more they proliferate, the more out of balance the gut is going to get. And so the more you're going to feel that you just cannot help finishing off the whole box of biscuits or the whole packet of crisps or the whole cake or whatever it happens to be, because you're being driven by the survival part of your brain and the gut bacteria. Yeah. Which
Right.
means that there is a reason for it. It's not your fault. Okay. So that's the
Yeah.
first thing to know. And here's the thing. Nobody sets out to do these things to harm themselves. We do something, we feel better. The brain logs it. It works. So when you feel that way again, the brain goes, hey, remember when you felt like this before and you went and ate that thing or you went and drank that alcohol and you felt better? Why don't you go and do that? Right? So you get pushed towards these things. And when we try and consciously stop it with willpower, well, all I'm going to say is good luck with that, because your body is more powerful. The survival instinct and the gut bacteria are driving you to do it. There's also been a dip in your neurotransmitters. So we've now got hormones coming into the picture as well. These are all bodily responses, nothing to do with your conscious mind, right? So your hormones, when you're in stress, cortisol comes in, adrenaline comes in, noradrenaline comes in. So think cortisol and adrenaline in the body, think noradrenaline in the brain. All of these hormones come in. As they come in, your serotonin, particularly your dopamine hormones, will almost decrease. So the more stress, the more the dopamine and serotonin decrease. When serotonin and dopamine decrease, and stress is doing this, cortisol is releasing glucose into the system. The body then goes, okay, we should be having to stand up, fight, run away. We're not doing that. So all of this glucose is flying around in your system here. Insulin comes in, dips the glucose, but these are still dropped, right? So now the brain says, you need something. Yeah. When insulin comes in, often it drops the glucose levels lower. So now you've got stress hormones that have dropped glucose, pushing you to high fat, high sugar, high calorie foods. You've got a decrease in dopamine and serotonin, which will get elevated by those high fat, high calorie, high sugar foods. You've got the survival part of your brain, and you've got your gut bacteria. So all of those things are why we turn to those foods and keep on doing it.
Wow. It sounds like it's just really, really difficult to get out of the circle then. So what would you recommend for, like, in terms of first steps for getting
really
out
good question
of the
Yeah.
habit?
And I think you said there, that was a really lovely word that you used. It is a circle. And it's a cycle that we get in. It's a stress response cycle. It's a glucose response cycle. The more we keep doing that kind of behavior, the more we're setting ourselves up for leaky gut problems, for autoimmune issues, for type 2 diabetes, for Alzheimer's. And so you're absolutely right. How we need to get out of the cycle, and how do we do it? And that is where I help people to recognize, forget willpower. Most people go about it trying to change the behavior. That's the wrong place to start. What I explain to people is that there's an art to health, and there's an art to getting free from addiction. And art is an acronym. And the A stands for awareness, the R stands for responsibility, and the T stands for taking timely, appropriate action. Now, most people go straight to T. Right, that's it. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to buy any of those foods, because if I don't have them in the house, I'm not going to drink them. I'm not going to eat them. Right. And then we go straight into restrict. Okay. Well, what happens if I tell you can't have something? What does happen? If I say to you, Marie, right, that's it. You want it. Of course you do. Right. Because that's what humans do. So the more you restrict, you're going to be able to use willpower, aren't you? Probably for a while. Yeah. Until.
It really depends.
Right. Good book. Yeah.
It depends on the day.
It probably depends on the day. And it depends on what I'm telling you can't have, probably, as well. And you're absolutely right. Some days you'll be able to do it and it's a breeze. But other days, a bit more of a challenge. At some point, though, you are going to say, sod it. That's it. I'm just going for it. I'm having it. Right. And we all do it. Because there's only so long that we can deny ourselves something that, A, we enjoy, or B is going to give us something that we think that we need. And that's where people go wrong. So we don't start with taking action. We start with the awareness. So that's the A in the acronym. And the awareness is, what is the behavior that I'm doing? What am I actually doing? Right? Because often I said to you, people feel like they're in a trance. Then they don't even know until afterwards what they did. Why are they doing it? Is it because of a specific thought that was triggered by a specific thing that somebody said, for example? Let's look at, why are you doing this? What do you believe it's giving you? Is it based upon a story that you're telling yourself that you actually believe? There's a lot of diet myths out there, and a lot of the stuff that people are doing in terms of restricting or cutting stuff out is one of the very reasons that they're binge eating. So what is the story you're telling yourself? Where are you doing it? Who are you with? What was going on before you did it? And what do you normally do afterwards? Once we know exactly, we've got full awareness of what the whole process is, why we're doing it, we then also need to say, why do you want to not do it anymore? Because those two whys are important, not just the first one. What is the reason that you don't want to do it? What is happening to you that you are really sick and tired of? What is going on? Because if you don't have a powerful enough reason to want to stop the behavior, you're not going to do it. So that's the first thing to do. Get really clear on your awareness. We then have to look at another A within that awareness, and that's associations. Particularly when it comes to alcohol and food, think about, where do these things crop up all of the time globally? Celebrations. Yeah. Community get-togethers with people. Well, whatever religion you are, I can guarantee you there's going to be some kind of festival where people are eating food together. Often it's specific types of food. Yeah, depending on what culture you're in, sometimes there's alcohol involved within those religious kind of celebrations and rituals. Sometimes there isn't. But think about Christmas and Easter and birthdays and graduations, and what do we associate all of those things with? And what types of food are we eating when we're behaving in a celebratory fashion? And then look at, what do we do if we're upset? Or what have we been taught to do when we're upset? Often it's related to food, isn't it? But specific food, very often. So if you're a kid and you're really upset and your mum says, oh, come on, I'm going to cheer you up, let's go get ice cream. What's the association that you've now got from being very small?
If I'm upset, I can treat myself to an ice cream, or
Right.
I get an ice cream.
Right, exactly. So now we've got a powerful emotional connection with feeling safe because you're with mom, right? With feeling calm because this is what we do. So can you see that it's not just the biological, physiological, it's also the associations that we have with certain foods, which is why often when we emotionally and we binge eat, we tend to veer towards specific foods. So this is all part of the awareness process, because then we can ask ourselves different questions. What can I do that's not food or alcohol related that can help me to feel, say, connected? Do I actually need to give my mum a ring? Or do I need to give a good friend a ring? Do I need to ask somebody for a hug because I just need to feel held and feel safe? So there's questions that I ask people. And, you know, when we're doing the awareness bit, HALT is a very good acronym. So literally, when you do that HALT, it just gives you a moment, doesn't it, to just stop. And that's kind of a universal stop sign. Am I hungry? Right? Chances are when we're emotionally eating, we're not hungry at all, right? But we can also ask, do I need hydrating? Because oftentimes we turn to food when really we need to be drinking. If it's not those things, then we need to ask, am I A, angry, annoyed, avoiding? Yeah. Am I L, lonely or bored? Am I T, tired, tense, telling myself I deserve a treat. Because if it's any of those things, food and alcohol may temporarily make you feel better, but it's actually not what you are looking for and what you need. So that's the very first step, is the whole awareness piece. And everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have a different reason why they turn to certain foods. What are their specific go-to foods and why they are so powerfully connected to feeling better. And then you can start taking responsibility for trying different ways of changing your behavior patterns. It could be that you just have a go-to person that you ring up and have a conversation with. It could be that you start journaling on your feelings instead of eating them or drinking them. It could be that you need to take a few breaths and actually have a conversation with somebody and say what you really need to say instead of bottling it all up and keeping it inside. So this is where, working with somebody like me, we can talk through what is appropriate for that person and when do they take these steps. But it's a process, and you're not going to do it overnight.
Yeah, for sure. And after assessing what the situation is, what further lifestyle changes tend to be recommended to such individuals?
Well, I think the first thing to do is, a lot of these things are driven by feeling uncomfortable in yourself and feeling a sense of stress. So whether that's, low self-worth or frustration or any of those things. So what we need to look at is, what steps am I taking just to look after my whole body and my whole lifestyle, which obviously will help reduce stress, but also will help us to live longer, hopefully happier and healthier. So things like, number one for me is sleep. Because if we are not sleeping, then we are going to, by default, be putting our body under physical stress. Okay. And we know there's enough research out there now that if people are regularly getting less than 6 hours, then the effect on their cellular function, their hormones, and how they handle stress is significantly decreased. So sleep is crucial. That's the first thing. The second thing that obviously is dehydration, and most of us are walking around in a state of dehydration. So looking at the basics. The third thing, so that's sleep, hydration, and the third thing, and honestly, I'm saying 1, 2, 3, but I'd put these all equally at number one, is how are we actually breathing? Because many people who turn to food, to alcohol, who have a lot of stress, are mouth breathers. And they breathe very shallowly from their chest. Right? And you're making a face that tells me, perhaps you're a mouth breather, right?
Look,
And a lot of us are.
I have issues with my nasal cavity, okay? I have sinus issues.
Right.
So anyway.
Right. And yeah, no, but here's an interesting thing. And often those sinus issues are created by stress. So
That's
it's
great.
kind of
That's wonderful
it's a
news.
catch-22. Right. But what we can do is actually you can work on those sinus issues by helping you to just practice doing different ways. And there's some nice tools out there now that can actually help with that stuff. But just learning to be aware first. Am I? Even asking yourself the question, because most people don't know. I don't know. Do I breathe from my nose or my mouth? I'm not sure. So those three things equally important, because if your body's not getting enough oxygen, and not just oxygen, but enough nitric oxide to feed the cells and to help with hormone production and everything else, then you're going to be creating an internal stress response and you don't even know it's happening. So those are the three things that I would say focus on. Posture follows. Because if you're on your phone and your head is down and your whole rib cage is caving in, your lungs can't fully expand. It's impossible. So those are simple things that everybody can start to make an effort to improve on. Right? This is not like get it right straight away. You have to take baby steps. If you're going to bed at 2:00 in the morning, you're not suddenly going to go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's not going to happen. Right? But you can start to make some changes. Also look at, in general, how much are you moving? Because us moving very little is a huge physiological stressor on our bodies. And your body doesn't care whether it's a thought that you're thinking that creates the stress or whether it's physical stress. It doesn't matter. The response is still the same. It's still happening. So how much are you moving? And if you're not moving your body frequently, then maybe start setting a timer every 20 seconds to just, stand up and sit down out of your chair. You don't have to make it major. You don't have to go and do a workout for an hour, right? Which is ridiculous. But will 1 minute of you standing up and sitting down in your chair help to make a difference? Yeah, massive, huge. So those are simple things that you can do. Obviously, breathing techniques you can do to help to manage your stress. But if you're in an office situation, probably not going to sit there in front of everybody practicing breathing techniques. I mean, you might, but so think about what's practical for you. Think about what's sensible. Crucially, think about what you can do quickly, because stress is chronic. We've said it. It's kind of coming in by every single thought you think that goes through your head, as well as how we're sitting, etc., etc. So anything that you can do fast that's going to just give you a reprieve is great. Okay. Changing your environment in terms of get into a different room, right? Just have a conversation with somebody instead of always sending text messages, right? How about you actually speak to a human? Because connection and conversation face to face, means that we clear up a lot of miscommunication issues, right? Which is massive when it comes to stress. But it also means that you're feeding off the energy of the other person, and it just allows your brain and, crucially, your eyes to take in different stuff. And so a different environment creates a different energy. It helps us to feel better. And it's not hard to even if it's just go change rooms. Yeah. So all of this stuff is simple and it's quick. And the other thing that you can then do is just be more mindful of quality food that you're eating. And I always say to people, crowd out the crap being an acronym. Yeah. So carbonated foods, carbohydrate foods are the ones that we kind of want to be avoiding. Things that are processed, highly processed, that come in a lot of packets, and that once you start eating them, you can't stop. Don't try not to eat them. We've already said that that's not helpful. It's going to make you binge. But allow yourself to have them when you've had protein, fiber, fat. And that PFF is what I always say to people. Focus on the protein first, the fiber and the fats. Nature's amazing if you are somebody who does eat animal produce, because nature's provided the right kind of fat along with the protein together, so you don't even have to think about the fat. Fiber, fruit with skin on, berries, a great source of fiber, vegetables, great source of fiber. But also allow yourself to have the things that you enjoy, because if you're restricting yourself, you are going to be stressed. So let yourself have it. If it's an ice cream after every dinner, because that helps you to feel calm and it feels good, and you know that because you've told yourself you can have it, one scoop is enough, then do it, right? If you go in, actually, I can't do that because if it's in the house, I know it's there and I'll eat more of it. Well, then allow yourself to, when you go out, for example, have a dessert. Don't restrict yourself when you're going out to eat. So it's working out what people can do for themselves in their environment, in their world, that is doable. Because what we don't want to be doing is telling them to do a whole shed load of things that then create more stress.
Yeah. And are there any challenges when it comes to making all of these small little lifestyle changes?
I think the most important thing is don't judge yourself if you find that you're going back into old behavior patterns, because going backwards, and I hate the word failure, but it's a word that people use, so we'll use it. But failure is just feedback, right? So we need to embrace the failures. We need to embrace getting it wrong so that we can then look at, okay, so what happened? What can I do differently next time? And I think that the most important thing for people is to just give themselves permission And that's a hugely powerful word. Give yourself permission to try things and see what works for you, and slow down. It's not a race. You will get there faster if you slow down.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today, Vicky. Now, let's go into the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you. Well, I think I've mentioned my main kind of passion is the thing that I was kind of venting about, is that when it comes to illness and disease, we've kind of been taught that one problem, one solution, and we are forever treating symptoms. And if we keep on doing that, we're going to carry on getting fatter and sicker than ever before. So we need to look at root cause. And I think the most important thing that I want your listeners to take on board is you need to be compassionate with yourself, but also you need to know yourself, because most of us don't know. We don't know what we do, why we do it. We don't know what we're thinking. You know, if I say to the majority of people, what was the last thought that you had? I don't know, because we're not aware of what we're thinking. And if we can start to be more conscious with what we're doing instead of unconscious, 95% of the actions that we take and the thoughts that we think are the same ones that we took the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before, and they become automated. So they genuinely are not conscious. And the majority of people walk around in an unconscious state. And I'm going to invite people to start being more conscious, because when you can be conscious, you can start to get curious about you. Okay, that's interesting. Why do I think that? Why did I do that? Let me have a little look at it. So it's all part of that awareness piece. And once you know yourself really, really well, that's when making changes isn't hard. Looking at root cause doesn't have to be complicated if you're open to being compassionate and to being curious. And that is how we're going to all live longer, healthier, and happier.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. However, I do wonder, because I do this sometimes as well, where I try to be a bit more mindful about whatever I'm thinking, but it just ends up at a point where I'm kind of flooded with all these thoughts and questions about why I did certain thing, or why I thought a certain way, or anything like that. And I actually now find it really, really difficult to listen to music or do anything on my phone when I'm on the commute to work, which is probably maybe a good thing. I'm not sure. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really good point, because we can get into a habit of believing that we're not in control of our thoughts because they seem to be coming in. When we understand brain as opposed to mind, and the way that I kind of explain this to people is, think of your brain as like your computer. Right? If you've got a laptop computer, it's kind of the housing, and it's the board that's inside the computer. But when you then think about your mind is the actual programming that's on that board. So a Dell computer is not the same as a Mac computer, is not the same, but the housing's pretty much the same, right? It's a laptop, it all kind of looks the same. So when you understand the difference between your brain and your mind, that's when you can start to feel more in charge of your thoughts. We only ever have one thought that comes in at a time, even though sometimes it feels like we have a cascade and a tsunami of thoughts that are flooding us. It's only ever one thought at a time. And what we can start to do is just start to be curious and just go, okay, that's interesting. What you described there is what I would class as analysis paralysis. You're going into the why. Rather than saying why, just say, okay, that's interesting. That's the thought that I had about that thing, right? It's just interesting. And then just let it move on, because our thoughts and our feelings can be like a little flowing stream. And I like visuals, and I like to think about, when I'm sitting on the train, and all these thoughts and feelings are going to be doing this, unless there's a thought or a feeling that maybe I'm not so comfortable with. And then I put a blooming great big dam in the middle of my stream that was flowing very nicely, right? And all of these leaves back up, and suddenly I've amplified and I've made this thing huge, right? Whereas if I just move that log out of the way, it'll all just flow past again. So this is where you start being interested, but also know you can literally just go, nope, not thinking that. You can stop. You can stop the thoughts. And if we say the word no, or if we, slap your desk or clap your hands, there's a noise that interrupts for 1 nanosecond that thought process. It might be a click of the fingers. Go, no, I'm going to think about this. You can consciously choose to think about something else. Or if you're listening to music and you can't seem to get into it, you can consciously choose to say, right, whatever sound comes up next, I'm going to try and replicate it. I'm going to try and hum that sound. Now, if you're focusing on trying to hum that sound, whatever tone it is, you're very unlikely to now be back in the thoughts that you had a second ago.
True. I am pretty forgetful with whatever especially with recent thoughts that I haven't really thought about long term.
Yeah.
I tend to forget them.
And I think that one of the most powerful things that I can say to people is if you feel like your thoughts are overtaking you, get into your body. Because if I say to you right now, what's your left toe feeling like? Your left big toe, what's it feeling like? Your brain has now, you just suddenly thought about your left big toe, haven't you? Yeah? Right?
Yeah, and I was about to answer.
Yeah. Well, tell me, what is it feeling? What is it feeling?
Sweaty from being in a little constrained area for several hours.
Right. And what's the toe next to it doing?
Also being sweaty, but less because there's less surface area to sweat.
But if you've now taken your mind and your thoughts into your body, you're no longer in your head, right? So you've got now space. And then when you decide that you're no longer going to focus on your big toe, you can now choose, what am I going to focus on? And it doesn't have to be your left big toe, but it's the point is, get out of your head and into your body.
Right.
For a lot of the clients that I work with, I pick something like a toe or a finger or an ear, because a lot of them have body image issues. And so I'm not going to say focus on a body part that I know that they really don't like. So it has to be something that's pretty neutral, that you can focus on. But we can all do it. Get out of your head, get into your body. And that just gives you an opportunity, if you like, to sort of reset and then get conscious and go, okay, I don't want to think about my big toe anymore. What shall I think about? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise with us today, Vicky. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
The best place to find me on social media is I hang out on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'm just Vicky Midwood on both of those, as my website is vickymidwood.com.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.